Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Faith, Hope, and Love. We are growing our faith in God, hoping in Jesus Christ, and we are loving God by studying His Word, learning more about Him. We are loving one another through prayer and encouragement, and loving the world by sharing the gospel with them. And the world really does need the truth right now. We are on part 4 of this series where we're looking at the gospel as it's declared throughout Scripture. And today, you guys are going to recognize some of the techniques and tools that we've used in some of the other videos or introduced in the other videos, like looking at the Hebrew letters and different name meanings, the patterns that are set by the symbolism and typology and numbers and such. So we looked at Jesus as the Passover lamb and kind of that section in Exodus. And so we're picking up where the Israelites are going to be crossing the Red Sea and looking at how that is symbolic of deliverance, the parting of waters. God fulfilling that name of Waymaker. And then looking at how he provided for them in the desert and the symbolism of the manna and the water when the rock is struck. Once again, Numbers. On Mount Sinai, we have the 40 days, 40 nights, and some other connections with that. And then there is so much with the tabernacle that I just kind of pared it down to looking at these two bits, the menorah and the incense, how we have these symbols in the Old Testament and some connections really at the end of the end of the New Testament with Revelation. And then I say fun finds, but really just breaking down the specific verse where I found some interesting pieces to look at. So start us off with Exodus 14 and the Red Sea. So let's just read the little passage there. You guys are welcome to read all the way verses 1 to 20, but just picking up in verse 21. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right and on their left. So we're seeing the water parted, and that is this way being made, a deliverance, a symbolic deliverance. Now, the first time we really see waters parted is back in Genesis 1 during the creation. Genesis 1. There we go. So the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. This one, the face of the deep. So really, you just have this massive body of water. Get down to verse 6. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So we have this split being made so that there is a place for the rest of creation, that we're going to have the dry ground and the flowers and the trees and the animals, and that humanity can exist. So a way being made by the parting of waters. Later on, of course, we know that the Israelites mess up. They do not get into the promised land right away. But eventually we get to Joshua, and they need to cross the Jordan River. And so God again parts the waters here. It says, "And as they that bear the ark were come unto the Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for the Jordan overfloweth all his banks all the time of harvest." So this is the time when the river is overflowing the banks. "That the waters which came down from above stood and rose up upon a heap very far from the city of Adam, that is beside Zaratan, and those that came down towards the sea of the plain, even the salt sea, failed and were cut off, and the people passed right against Jericho. And the priests that bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all the Israelites passed over on dry ground until all the people were passed clean over the Jordan." So once again, waters are parted, a way is made, deliverance. And that's, we're talking about the gospel and its salvation. We are, there's this chasm between us and God. There's an obstacle made by the sin, and the cost of sin is death. But God makes a way through Christ. And that imagery of the parting of waters as deliverance is in contrast to when waters come together and clash. We see that as judgment. So in Noah, the waters which were parted above and below are going to come crashing together for in Genesis 7:11 during the time of the flood. So let's look at that. "And in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the same day were all the fountains of the great deep," so that's the waters below, "broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened." So the waters above, the waters below. When you look at the images of the earth and you see those ravines, those chasms, the ridges in the oceans on the floor, I know that there are some like creationist scientists who propose that is where the waters that were below burst forth through the crust, came up and added to the flood waters. Of course, we know this is, for Noah's time, a time of judgment. And back in Exodus 14, where our story is that we're falling through, the waters are going to come crashing together in judgment of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. "And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out thine hand over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. And Moses stretched forth his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to his strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it, and the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The waters returned, covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them. There remained not so much as one of them. So waters coming together in a clash is judgment. Jesus, of course, we see that in Luke 17, it says it'll be as the days of Noah, which flood, coming waters clashing together. But then in Luke 21, where we get the discourse of the end times, which would match Matthew 24 and Mark 13, when Jesus is talking about the end times, he says, nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. So waters are also symbolic of people. Seas are nations. So we see the clashing of the waters, this nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. And it's this time of judgment. So you go on to Revelation, when the vision that John sees is this prophecy by Jesus to come true. And you have the red horse rider. There went out another horse that was red, and power was given him that sat upon to take peace from the earth, so war, that they should kill one another, clashing of waters, and there was given in him to him a great sword. Okay, so like I said, waters coming together in clashing, people against people. This is judgment, as opposed to the waters being parted and being deliverance and salvation. Let's look now at the time that they were in the desert. In Exodus 16 is the story where God provides the manna. The people are hungry, and they're starting to complain that, they should have just stayed in Egypt because now they're going to die of hunger. But God sends, and you see that even the the title of this section, at least what's placed here in this translation, is bread from heaven. So manna comes down. They're able to collect it and be satisfied. In John 6, then this should be, in the people's minds when Jesus says that he is the bread of life. Talking about, he had given them the loaves in the feeding of the 5,000 and such. But he himself was the bread that they needed to partake of. You also see Jesus as the living water. So bread and water. It's like we can live, 30 days without food? We can only live 3 days without water. And then what did they say? 3 minutes without air. He's the air that we breathe, the living water and the bread of life. Let's go to John 4. Because this is the story of the woman at the well. And you see the exchange between them. He tells her, whoever drinketh this water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. So that living water. Okay, so, and then, don't mean to do that. All right, so we see that kind of pattern when the rock is struck for the water to be provided in Exodus 17. Let's look at that story. And all the congregation of Israel, the children of Israel, journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore people did chide with Moses and said, give us water that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why chide with me? Where do you tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses and said, wherefore is this that thou hast brought us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our cattle with thirst? So he's provided them with all the food that they needed, and now they're going to complain about not being able to have a drink. It said, the Lord said to Moses, go on before the people and take the elders of Israel and thy rod, and with smote the river, take in thy hand and go. Because they had to get fresh water from the bitter water. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Oreb. So rock. That's important symbolism. And thou shalt smite the rock. Jesus will be smited. Jesus as the rock will be smited or smote. What's the proper grammar there? When in the crucifixion. And there shall come water out of it, and the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called by name the place Massah and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So Jesus as the living water provided for them, but Jesus is the rock that gets struck. We see examples of God referred to as the rock of salvation in these particular verses. Let's look at some of those. 2 Samuel 22:47. 2 Samuel 22, verse 47. Here we go. The Lord liveth, and blessed be my rock, and exalted be the rock of the God of the rock of my salvation. And again, we'll see this in Psalm 18. Psalm 18. The Lord is my rock, right here in verse 2. First Corinthians 10:4. Get to the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 10:4. And did all drink the same spiritual drink, that living water, for they drank of the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So definitively that Jesus is the rock, and the living water comes from him. And then thinking about the Last Supper, where wine and water, can be compared together. Think of the wedding at Cana, where the water is drawn out, it becomes wine. Okay. And then the bread of life, the manna. So then we see in Luke 22 that Last Supper, the language that Jesus uses. And he took bread and gave thanks and brake it and gave unto them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me. Likewise also the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the New Testament in my blood, which is shed for you. Okay. So all connections from the Old Testament imagery to help us better understand Christ's sacrifice for us. All right, let's look at one of the interesting numbers, 40, which gets repeated a lot. We're just going to look at some of the examples of when 40 days or 40 days and nights combination is used. So, we were looking at Noah's story earlier, Genesis 7. I'm not going to go there this time, but we have the 40 days and 40 nights of the rains. For our passages that we're kind of following through, we'll look at, let's go there. 24:18. This is 24:18. And Moses went in the midst of the cloud that get him up into the mountain, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. we see lots of 40 days and 40 nights. Now, I've heard it proposed, and I do think I agree with this, that these 40 particular 40 days and 40 nights, if we were to plot it out on the calendar, would align with where we see Jonah declaring to Nineveh those 40 days, 40 nights. So get down in Jonah. He, after his disobedience and having to be brought to the Nineveh by the whale and stuff, and throughout he said, Jonah began to enter the city a day's journey, and he cried and said, yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown. So there's this time of repentance, that window that the Ninevites will have, and they do end up doing a fast and putting on sackcloth and such. And this time frame is kind of leading up to that, when the Jews even still today practice a period of repentance and stuff. And notice they had the fasting. So then the proposal is also that these would be the same days that Jesus was in the wilderness. So when Moses was on Mount Sinai, when Jonah had this 40 days, and then Jesus being in the wilderness tempted of Satan. You can see the verbiage here. Matthew 4. And there Jesus led of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted, 40 days, 40 nights, he afterward hungered. So the proposal that those events all happened on the same 40 days, 40 nights, as far as if you would look in on the calendar for each of those years when they occurred. I always think it's interesting when God does that kind of thing. Other examples of 40, you guys could probably leave some examples of 40s, whether it's days and nights or just 40 specific things. Or we saw the 40 years that they had to wander in the desert. But feel free to leave in the comments other examples of 40 that you remember from the Bible. Okay, so like I said earlier, a lot with the tabernacle instructions in the next few chapters of Exodus. But I like to think of the menorah. Now, it can be examples of the feasts, because there are 7 feasts of the of the Lord through the year. But I really think the menorah represents the church. So it's very specific instructions given to Moses that there would be the one main lamp, candlestick, and then there would be these branches off on either side, 7 in total, that the oil would be put in for the light. And it was cast in gold. Another reason I think it represents the church, and you think of the bride, the church. You see Rebecca in Genesis 24, when Eleazar goes on behalf of Abraham to find a wife for his son Isaac. There was another example of the well that a woman is found at. Genesis 24:2. And it came to pass, as the camels had done drinking, that the man took a golden earring of half a shekel weight, and 2 bracelets for her hands of 10 shekels weight of gold. And he said, "Whose daughter art thou?" And he puts the ring in her nose and decorates her with the gold. So the bride is is covered in the gold. And then we see in the New Testament the 7 churches. Revelation. So to the 7 churches. And you have this vision of the Son of Man. What was my Bible, my specific verse? 13, okay. I have to scroll through too much here. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, this is lampstands, okay? So the menorahs. One like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about with the paps of golden girdle. His head, his hairs were white like wool and white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire. But so you see the 7 and menorah connection with the church, which is my picture here. Oh, Jesus. Another part of the description that is given to Moses for the tabernacle is the incense that had to be in the temple eventually, but in the tabernacle, so that when God's presence was within the tabernacle, that the people would be protected from seeing him and dying. And that's why, and so incense and cloud are very closely intertwined. We saw that he was going forth like a cloud, leading the people. And get back up to even to 13. What was it, 21? And the Lord went before them day by day in a pillar of a cloud. Okay, so cloud, incense, kind of the same thing, to protect them from seeing him and dying. This was really important on the Day of Atonement, when the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies. And so there's a possibility that when we see Zacharias in Luke 1 going into the temple to do his service of the incense, that it could have been that time frame. It's just a proposal, because like I said, and according to the custom of the priest's office, his lot was to burn incense when he went into the temple of the Lord. So it could have been during that time for the Day of Atonement, when the high priest was going to be going in, that it was just his job at that time to burn the incense. Just a possibility when we're trying to figure out when was John born and then when was Jesus born. And so this is echoed then in Revelation, when it describes Jesus at, he's going to be returning in a cloud or on the cloud, but particularly in the throne room of God. This maybe gives us a time frame when, so of course you have the cloud that for the harvest time frame is the ending. So now I personally believe in a pre-tribulation rapture escape sort of scenario. But before anyone goes crazy and tries to, write a bunch of comments about how they think it's pre-trib or mid-trib, I have studied all the different viewpoints. I've gone through the different theories. And so, I personally have come to the conclusion there's a pre-trib, but I also understand your arguments for mid and post-trib. And I do have an essay that I wrote, which you're welcome to read, on my final conclusions on the matter. But I think we all can agree that at the end, either way, Jesus does come down, on the Mount of Olives. But in the end, so we're seeing this imagery of the incense being burned, and it echoes this time of the Day of Atonement, just to give us possibly a clue once again for a timeline, specifically when it's talking about the seven plagues and stuff. It says, oh, where's the verse here? Okay, and after that I looked, and behold, the temple of the tabernacle of the testimony in heaven was opened, and the seven angels came out of the temple, having the seven plagues, clothed with white linen, and one of the first beasts, vials. Okay, yeah, here it is. This is that imagery of the smoke or the incense, the kind of the cloud thing. And the temple was filled with smoke from the glory of God and from his power. And no man was able to enter the temple till the seven plagues, the seven angels were fulfilled. Okay. So it's possible that, as far as the timeline for the end here, that Day of Atonement and the incense imagery might come into play. Just possible. Interesting things to look for as we're studying through. And as I said, there is just so much with the how they set the tabernacle up and everything that you guys can dive in to find the symbolism and connect with that. All right, so last little bit, we are going to look at this specific verse, Exodus 15:27. Going back up here a bit. I thought there were just some interesting words in this passage. So once again, we saw that they were complaining about not being able to drink. They were near it was called, they came to Mara, which means bitter, and they can't drink the water, and it has to be purified basically. And they came, so he eventually leads them from that space. They came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water. This is basically an oasis area, and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. So first off, 12, that was an important number we studied before. You have the 12 tribes, the 12 disciples. 70 is 70. How many times do we see 70 pop up? There were the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out. There are 70 years of the captivity, over and over and again. 70, especially in years, pops up. But the symbolism of palm trees, an example of that is in Revelation 14, I think. Was it Revelation 14? Or was it just 7? Maybe just 7. Yeah. So the great multitude, they have palms in their hands. When Jesus was entering Jerusalem, the triumphant entry that we read about it's in all the Gospels, the examples, but they have palms in their hands that they're waving, greeting the Lord. Go back to my Exodus 15:27. Okay, so those were some things I noticed right off the bat. But then also names are important. So in this particular case, you know what? I am sorry, I did not have this blown up for you guys before, but this word Elim, well, means palm trees. But what I thought was very cool was the letters. And when we studied the pictographic meanings, So we have Aleph, Yod, Lamed, Mem. So this name for Elim, which means palm trees. So if you look at those pictograph meanings, you've got God by work of his hands. The Lamed is like the shepherd's staff, and so it can be understood as teaching or leads them to water. The Mem means water. So he's led them to the water that they need at this place with the palm trees. I just thought that was kind of fun. I am so sorry I did not have this blown up for you guys the entire time. Okay, so that was Elim. And then it was interesting that it was not just like, or I just popped into this wells, and instead of using wells as like, you often see it as a pit. Let me just open this up. Yeah, so it's something well, but so the H875, you can see often a well or wells, these are pits, like the abyss, like kind of that negative sort of connotation. So I was really interested when I saw that this wells is Ayin. Now Ayin is the eye normally. Okay. That's why it was like, oh, that's really interesting to me. And Ayin is also one of the Hebrew letters. So look what value it is. The Ayin is 70. And we just click in on here. And the of course, like that pictograph symbol is the eye. So I would definitely encourage you guys to check out some of this information. Part of the reason it gets the value of 70 is it's the Yod, which is value of 10, and Zion, 7. So you have 7 times 10 gives you 70 for this Ayin. And check out the website. Go through. It's fun to read some of the little tidbits they have on each of the meanings of the letters, and especially since this particular website always helps it connect to Christ and the gospel message. What else did I want to say about this? Oh, also being the Ayin, I thought maybe symbolically, maybe it's because he wants them to have eyes to see. Like that's why we don't get a well like the pit. It's eyes to see. Some, a healing of blindness like we see in John 9. Go back over to our Esau here. John 9. The blind man, he of course puts the mud spittle and he has him go wash in this pool, okay? Wash the water, and that's when he is able then to see. So I thought there was some interesting imagery there. And of course, talked about the triumphal entry with the palms and in Revelation. And so, okay, so that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you again for joining. Continue to pray for each other. It's so important that we continue to meet with each other and encourage, because times are really hard. I know it's tough for a lot of us, and some are alone, really having trouble even finding a church community to plug into. So keep encouraging one another, keep praying for one another. Have a blessed day.